For those that don't know me, my name is Jim Knight, sometimes known as Lord Knight, which is just one of those accidents that happen when electrogravity catches up with you and the outgoing Prime Minister is feeling benign towards you. I can't possibly defend it as a way of putting people back in Parliament, but here I am and enjoying being a member of the House of Lords, being indeed the Baron Knight, which is a joke that I've overused ever since, and it only appeals to a certain older section of the audience. But I'm very much looking forward to today. I think we've got a really interesting range of speakers talking about a really good range of different topics. I've been asked in terms of housekeeping as the chair for the day to remind you to put your phones to silent. I'm not going to suggest you turn them off because I'm a bit of a technology evangelist and I fully expect you all to be tweeting and taking notes on your laptops and iPads and all that kind of thing. If you do want to connect to the Wi-Fi, choose the Arlington Conf1 Wi-Fi, and there is a code of crossover, all in uppercase, and the numeral 0. If you want to tweet, at govno, K-N-O-W, which is, well, what's written on screens, and I think written on your packs, is Government Knowledge's Twitter address. Mine is at Jim P. Knight. But I suggest a hashtag for those that are into this kind of thing of, and I'm looking down there, of Edu Reform 11. Just for the hell of it, we might as well agree on something. So I think those are all bits of housekeeping. I haven't been told that we're due to have a fire drill, so if it does go off, it looks like the fire exits are on that side of the room. There's all 3 doors, although once we're properly up and running, I think that the back doors will disconnect us from our coffee until the appropriate breaks. So that does me for housekeeping. In terms of opening remarks, and this is a very wide-ranging conference talking about education reform quite generally. So in just a few minutes, what I thought I'd do is, to some extent, reflect on, 3 of the last 5 years I was the schools minister. It was the earlier 3. I hastened to add right on the last 3. And I'm very proud of many of the things we were able to do in terms of a load more resource, a load more teachers, supported by many more support staff, doing, I think, the best generation of teachers we've ever seen. I think that's what Ofsted said. Great leadership, a real investment in the school infrastructure, and that produced a dividend in terms of improved results and steadily improving results over the period. And I could go on about other things that I think we did well, early years, youth policy and so on. But, and there is a but, now that I've had a chance to take some time away and reflect back, the thing that really gnaws at me is, after all of that time in office, the needs figures didn't really shift. I mean, they've shifted recently in the wrong direction, but they stay pretty constantly at about 10%. And the attainment gap, whilst it narrowed a little bit at the end, people like Chris Cook at the FT have done some really interesting analysis of that. At an individual level, the attainment gap between people from poorer homes and richer homes didn't narrow anywhere near enough, considering the amount we put in. And so, in many ways, that causes me to reflect on the assumptions of what we did in office. And there was a model, and I think it's a model that's now being turbocharged by the current government, which is based on, yes, you invest in better teachers and better leaders. With better leaders, you give them more autonomy, and Michael Gove goes on and on about the importance of autonomy. In exchange for autonomy, schools are held more accountable, and you drive the accountability system hard, and then you add in, on top of that accountability, parental choice, and that's supposed to drive school system-wide improvement. I think that's questionable, frankly. And there's a whole lecture I can give you around the importance of listening to the consumer, the customer of education more, but choice being a bit of a distraction compared to voice, and that we need to work harder on engagement as we go forward. And I think for me as a Labour politician, I have to think about where we might be in 2015, which is when the next general election is more than likely to be. I don't see any of the reforms that are going on now will actually narrow that achievement gap. Just all the evidence internationally, if you go with the free market system of schooling, suggests that it doesn't really work in gap narrowing. And so that problem will remain, and I think there will continue to be, for a proportion of learners, a crisis of relevance of their learning and the ability to engage with their learning, because it doesn't really feel that relevant to their everyday lives. And a big gap still between the output from the education system and the needs of employers. And I spent a year as the employment minister after I did schools, and I now also chair the Institute for Education and Business Excellence, and think a lot and talk a lot to employers about what they need. And so some of the questions for me going forward are, what's the future of 14 to 19? Are Ken Baker and Estelle Morris both right when they say that we should end the national curriculum at 14 and liberate 14 to 19 from the massive punctuation mark of GCSEs at 16? What should the curriculum and assessment look like so that it is more relevant for children? I spend a lot of time now, because I work closely with, amongst others, Apple and to some extent Intel and some of the other technology companies. In part, I do that because I think we should be using more of the technology that children are using at home in learning. These are fantastic devices for learning if we allow them in the school. But we're only really going to get a change in the pedagogy and classroom practice that reflects the potential and the relevance of technology if we start to think about how we use it in assessment. Because accountability is such an important driver of behaviour. Accountability is in turn informed by assessment. And there's a big challenge around how assessment embraces technology. The third set of questions are around accountability and governance. Unfortunately, Stephen Twiggs had to go to a funeral today, but Kevin Brennan, the Shadow Schools Minister, is going to come along and speak in his place. It's not for me to incite you to ask questions of my good friend Kevin, but one of the biggest questions facing the next government, whoever it is, will be, are they comfortable as we move to pretty much every secondary school and many primary schools being autonomous and the shrinking of the function of local government? Are we comfortable with there being nothing between the Secretary of State and schools? Is there a future for local authorities in some form? Or should there be something else in the middle? And then the final thing is around parents and professionalism. I've sort of wrapped two things together, which are possibly two things. The biggest single determinant of the success of a child is the engagement of their parents and their learning. And it goes back to what I was saying about choice and voice. How can we get parents better engaged in learning? I think schools should be pulling and pulling at parents until they become pushy, and embrace pushy parents, as long as people are pushing not for limited resources, so they're pushing for their child at the expense of another child, but pushing the school on the basis of much more information about how the child and how the school and the system is doing. That then raises questions about how that's sustainable for teaching staff. And I think that new forms of professionalism and how they work are an interesting area. The government, to their credit, in their first white paper, called it the importance of teaching. I think they've done all sorts of things since to undermine teachers' belief that they are being valued by this government. I won't get into strikes and pensions. But I do think how the profession networks together is a very interesting issue. I do a lot of work at TSL. They're the publishers of TES, but interestingly, in the most recent survey that TSL did with teachers, more people now associate TES with their resources site than the paper. And the resources site now has 1.7 million registered users during November, 3 downloads a second of free user-generated content for teachers sharing stuff with each other. That's a demonstration that the profession is starting to network and organise in different ways and on a global scale. That particular platform is in 200 countries globally.